You say I make you nervous, a tragedy, I'm a beautiful disaster, a reckoning, you wonder how I got this way.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to my channel. I'm Sunshinery. Make sure to subscribe and like this video.
And tame, oh, some things never change, never change. Oh. You think I would...
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. So Rachel says she hears us. She's going to answer all of these questions. Chapter 3, Smile Like You Mean It. And it says, why are you smiling? We hear your comments loud and clear. It's time to address the awkward smiling, the nervous laugh, the uncomfortable grin. Dr. Hillary Goldsher has the answers to why this is happening. So she brought in a professional to explain why she is, having this nervous laughter and awkward smile. Though she's done this, even if you've been watching the Vanderpump marathon on Bravo, she's been doing this since the very beginning. It's something that, yes, she does, but it also says a lot about when she does it and why she does it. So let's see what she has to say. Let's get into chapter 3. But first, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel, and then click all so you can get notified every time I post a video or go live.
Hey guys, it's Rachel Leviss from Rachel Goes Rogue. I'm so excited for today because I get to have a clinical psychologist on to join me, and I just want to go deeper on the psychology behind why I smile when I'm talking about things that make me feel so uncomfortable, because it seems counterintuitive. I just want to read a few of the comments that you guys left on the Rachel Goes Rogue podcast Instagram. Just a note, please work on the smiling. I'm sure it's out of nervousness and anxiety of speaking about hard topics, but this video comes across non-remorseful, just an opinion. I hear you. I know she has anxiety, but she has to learn to wipe the smile off her face. True evil, smiling. Wow. I tried saying what she said and smile at the same time, and it just felt strange. How does she not see that as abnormal? I don't understand how she could be smiling the whole time she's talking about this. So weird. Well, that's the feedback that I got from you guys. And I agree. Listening back, hearing me laugh about especially the Graham situation for me, that's not a funny thing. And I want to know why. What is this thing that my body does without me even knowing? Honestly, I'm excited to have a professional tell me why this is happening, because, yeah, it's not normal. The average person isn't smiling through their most painful, traumatic memories. So I hope we can get to the bottom of it.
So my thing is, she brings in a therapist to go over why she has this nervous laugh and this smile on her face when she's talking about rough situations, but she's not having the therapist come in there to understand what she's actually going through and why, she might not feel like she's being held accountable, though she might feel like she's being held accountable. There are other issues besides the nervous tics that she has that we have questions to. She is not taking any responsibility for her actions in this affair. She's literally put the blame on everybody else but herself. That is a problem. Why isn't she working that out with the therapist? Why are we going over these nervous tics? I mean, yes, they have been comments that I've made, comments other people have made. It's something we notice. But really, the bottom line is we want the hard questions answered, not these stupid little tics that you have. I mean, I have my own tics, so I get it. But That's not the problem here. The problem is you have not taken any responsibility for your actions. What do you guys think? Let's keep listening.
Let's bring Dr. Goldsher on. Hi, Dr. Goldsher.
Hey, Rachel, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thanks for joining me today.
Of course. First of all, take a deep breath. I think this is going to be a really, really good experience for you and for your listeners, because you're talking about something that is ubiquitous and super relatable in the sense that a lot of people adopt behaviors and mannerisms and ways of moving through space when they're talking about tricky things and difficult material. People smile, people laugh, people drink too much, eat too little, work too much, work too little, right? People do lots of things when they're faced with taking on really hard stuff. And that part is really relatable. And it's really not until we get to make friends, so to speak, with the dynamics that are going on within us internally, in terms of understanding how we're moving through space in those really difficult moments, that we can start to shift and change and grow and better understand ourselves and impact people around us more positively and just understand ourselves more thoroughly. So I just want to start by saying that your specific situation is notable and a lot of people have a lot of thoughts and opinions on it, but what we're talking about at the root of it is really relatable. So I just want you to sort of take a deep breath around that. It's to respond in ways that are avoidant or dismissive in the face of hard stuff is really human. So I just want to start there.
Thank you.
And
yeah, thanks for recognizing all of that. And obviously I'm getting a lot of feedback from people saying I'm smiling too much. I'm laughing through the things that are more of a serious topic. And as I'm describing these things and recounting these memories, I'm not I don't think it's funny and I don't enjoy it. And so I feel like the messaging may be getting lost a little bit. But then when I talk to my family and I talk to my close friends, I have more of a serious demeanor and I'm not smiling through it. So I'm wondering, is it just me knowing that this is being broadcast to a lot of people listening?
Yeah. I mean, what is before I give my perspective, and it's layered and nuanced, but what are you sort of started to say it, but what are your initial thoughts or hypotheses about why, about what's happening?
So my hypothesis is that I had to modify my behavior as a child to appease the people around me. And that's how I got the positive attention that I received, being happy. I'm good over here. If I put on a happy face, then you don't have to worry about me and it's all good.
Well, this is super insightful. That's a really good hypothesis and a really good place to start. I mean, what you're talking about is being reinforced for emotional regulation.
I want to preface by saying I'm not a therapist. I am not a medical profession. These are my opinions. These are based on what I have seen, what I hear, what I continue to see and hear. So, again, I really don't understand why we are going over this, though I do know it is something that people have addressed, including myself. I also think that, this person's kind of on her side in the sense that she invited her onto this podcast. It's not like, say, a behavioral analyst sitting and then watching a video and giving their perspective from an unbiased place, which I did see a lot of during the whole Vanderpump reunion. And I've seen it on YouTube where behavioral analysts sat there and analyzed her behavior during the reunion and Tom's behavior and even Ariana's. And it was very interesting to hear and kind of pick and point out things. I'm not saying that this therapist is going to side with her. I'm just saying it's kind of a benefit for her to have someone on her podcast and be like, well, Rachel, this is what you do and why you do it. Maybe this will help her improve her audience presence and how she portrays the things that she wants to say without being so nervous that it makes it look bad how she's portraying herself with the laughs and, the smiling and things like that. All right, let's just get more into this. I'm sorry that I keep pausing. I don't think the whole comprehension of what we all want to hear, she's understanding. She's only nitpicking the things that we've nitpicked. She's not understanding. Her behavior still shows that she's not taking accountability.
Right?
Mhm.
Being reinforced for not being problematic, for not having out of control feelings or requests or needs, and for showing up okay. And maybe even a step beyond that, showing up happy, showing up as the pleaser, as the easy kid, as the one that was okay. So that was your probably unspoken but assigned role. And you came to know this is how I have value.
Mhm.
This is how I take up space in this family dynamic. This is how I show up to get love.
Exactly.
And that's a pretty intense set of messages, right? And even though you're at this moment able to articulate it well, which is a great first step, right? To have the insight and understand what your family dynamics are, just because we come to understand it, we aren't usually able to just erase it and never exhibit those behaviors again. In fact, in situations, particularly where there's stress and duress, it comes out again, right? And we may know it at the time, we may not know it at the time, we may understand it in retrospect, but we're vulnerable. So I imagine as you move through the world as an adult, when things are stressful, you might return to that old comfortable way of being. And I put that in quotes very deliberately, right? It's comfortable sense that it makes you feel like, this is how I have value. This is how I know to show up when things are hard. But I put it in quotes because it doesn't work as well as it did when you were a kid, right?
Right. It doesn't work for me any longer. In fact, it's more of I see it as like a protection for myself. And in the trauma therapy center that I spent 90 days learning and doing intense therapy, there's a term called wall of pleasant. And it's a wall that you have up, which keeps you from being intimate with other people. And therefore, you're not as relational and people can't connect to you on a deeper level. And so I recognize that, like, I have that wall of pleasant that I can't seem to help but to come up. And so what are the ways that you can like help me or other
Yes.
people who experience that kind of maybe approach it and intentionally work on it?
Yes. Yes. I love that term, well pleasant. I haven't heard of that. And I think that's such a good descriptor of the dynamic that happens for a lot of people when tough stuff comes up, to sort of abandon our mind and our hearts and even like our soul and sort of show up in this more robotic, rote way. And it ends up sometimes hurting others. And certainly it ends up hurting ourselves. We feel a huge disconnect between what we're feeling inside and how we're moving through the world.
That's so true. Like sometimes I can't figure out how I'm actually feeling.
So she doesn't understand how she's actually healing. Healing is a journey. Healing takes time. Healing takes work. If she is working on her mental health, if she's with a therapist every week talking about, this is how I'm feeling. How did I get to this point? How can I make this better? Where do I go from here? Those are all things that are part of that healing journey. And you might not understand how you're healing because you are healing with time. Every day is a new day. Every day you're waking up feeling better than the day before, that you can get through this, that you can understand this, that you could be better than what happened the day before. And to me, she just seems lost still. I don't think she understands really what her entire goal is for this podcast. And she is just trying to go with the flow of it and see what the end brings. I will also say, though, taking accountability for your actions and what happened to you and accepting accountability is one of the first steps in the healing journey.
That's right. That's right. Because there's this huge disconnect between this automatic response you have of sort of being the pleasant, to use your wall of pleasant analogy, right? The pleasant good girl, and how you're actually feeling inside, which could be like scared, chaotic, anxious, depressed. And if you're organically dedicated to the former, you are going to have a really hard time figuring out how you're feeling in the moment. So that leads to all sorts of confusion. And I imagine oftentimes that's what the public is seeing in these snippets of you talking about these issues, is this wall of pleasant and some confusion around how you are actually feeling in the moment. And so people sense that or feel that or experience it. So I think it's a good thing to lean into it like you are in this moment, that like, yeah, maybe I don't know how I'm feeling. And so maybe it's coming off as not being a match to the topic or the subject at hand. And that can be disarming for people who are witness to it, and certainly disarming for yourself as well. When you back on, I mean, unfortunately, you have the public aspect of it. So maybe you're looking back on a clip of yourself and you see the dissonance, or maybe you're just hearing the feedback, right? So that creates a lot of confusion. So you asked a question I don't want to miss, which is like, well, okay, what am I supposed to do about it? So I think what you're doing right now is the beginning of what you can do about it. I love the idea, I use this often, that insight alone is not enough. Insight alone is not enough. I say that more than once, because therapy is steeped in a lot of insight. We get to recognize things about ourselves that we didn't previously have knowledge about, right? And once we get that, that can be life-changing. However, that alone is not enough. We have to intervene in the moments when things get tricky. Otherwise, we just have the knowledge to talk about before or after, but the behavior remains, the same or not changed in a significant way. So what you've already started to do today in our conversation, I'm going to suggest that you borrow from, meaning that when you find yourself in situations where you're tasked to talk about tricky stuff, whether it's publicly like you're doing in your podcast or just with your buddies or in your therapeutic setting, et cetera, that you start to narrate out loud what's happening for you or what often happens for you, right? So the next time you're asked a question about this whole situation you're in or in the dynamics in your life that are tricky, that you start by saying some version of like, it's always hard when I talk out loud about stuff that's tricky. I sometimes smile about it. I sometimes laugh about it. I sometimes can't sink into the feelings that I really feel about that. So you may see that right now. I'm going to do my best to stay really connected to the actual feelings I have about it, but you may see me like flow in and out of it. It's something I'm working on. It's something I know about myself. It's something, I'm taking on and trying to interrupt. That first will inform listeners, and whether you're talking about your public listeners or just your private crew, that you're aware that that's happening and that it might feel strange to witness. And it also brings a certain level of accountability to you internally and externally, that like, I know this is happening and I've known. It sounds like in your work, in your trauma work, that you came to understand this about yourself. This isn't like new news, but you're bringing a certain level of accountability to it by saying it out loud to the people who are in relation with you, who are in dialogue with you.
I think the therapist makes a solid point right here that, yes, therapy takes time. You have to go above and beyond, not just going to therapy, but actively working on it as well. And like she said, you might be aware of your traumas, but the behavior still remains the same on how you deal with it. And until you can understand the behaviors and change that, then it could look like you're still the same, that you have the same behaviors and patterns on how you deal with hard situations. And that's something she needs to develop over time. I also agree, taking accountability, saying, hey, I'm working on myself right now. I know that when I start talking about this, it's a very tough topic for me, though I tend to get very nervous and I laugh at things that maybe I shouldn't be laughing at, but it's my nervousness coming out and I need to work on that. It's something I am actively working on. I need you all to be aware of this so that way I can be aware of my behaviors as well to try to fix this. Again, like she said, it's that first step of being aware of your behaviors, then actively taking accountability of those behaviors to then develop change to those behaviors. And it's kind of like if you have a behavior that every time you get upset, you start getting very heated, angry, start yelling and screaming. If you go into a tough situation where you know that it's possible that you are going to get loud, get angry, start screaming, you go into that saying, hey, listen, this is a very tough subject for me. I don't want to get into that behavior where I start yelling and screaming and get out of control. So I need some time, if that happens, that I don't end up there. And the second it starts to even start, you pull yourself back and say, okay, breathe, relax. We're not trying to yell and scream. We're trying to figure this out. What do you all think so far? Let me know down below.
What do you think about that? I'm curious if you imagined yourself doing that, what that brings up.
When I am telling a story, and I'm thinking of the next thing that I want to say as well to get my point across. I, let's see. I feel like when I address how I'm feeling in this moment, it may take my focus away from what story I'm trying to convey. And so then it becomes like this juggling act.
Yeah. 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 So it brings up a certain level of anxiety for you that like, I'm going to lose my train of thought and I'm going to get sort of buried in all the dynamics you just described and just lose my way, which does not sound pleasant. And I'm sure does not sort of promote what I'm suggesting automatically. But I would say this, I would say as you're on the journey to reconcile what we're talking about, you know, the difference between what you're actually feeling inside and how you're able to talk about it. I mean, that's really what we're talking about. That accepting, I don't know, the messy middle is a critical piece of that. And that's what you're describing. You're talking about the messy middle, which is like, if I do that, I might lose my place, literally forget what I'm saying and come off as more confused than I originally sounded, you know, before I got this feedback. And I maybe, and that's hard and not pleasant and something that we don't naturally feel ourselves drawn to. But I would argue it's really the space where change occurs, and maybe not immediately, maybe not right away. That's why we call it the messy middle, is you have to be like awkward and strange and weird and anxious and unsure to kind of build a muscle to sit in all of those differing truths at one time. And I take seriously what you said. And I would argue still that even given all those truths, all the more reason to sit in it. So, you know, to kind of back up on what we were saying, that you would take the risk of saying, like, I'm going to mention out loud here that when I start talking about hard things, I sometimes smile, I sometimes laugh. My real feelings inside are not reflected in how I show up. And I just want to say that out loud. I'm going to do my best to stay grounded in my feelings, but I may lose my way here. And then acknowledging further, wow, I've now lost my train of thought. Like, can you repeat the question? Can we start over? Right. That you just stay really real in what you're experiencing moment to moment. And I say this with a lot of gravity, because what I'm suggesting that you do is not easy. All of us understand, if we take a moment, that sitting in one's true feelings while being witnessed, whether it's publicly or, you know, with our group, is super vulnerable, super, super, super vulnerable. So I don't say this casually, and it's probably not something that just happens automatically because we're having this conversation. It's something that you really have to work at and really have to accept the vulnerability around it and accept like the root of it, the base of it, which is that that's where change happens. When we get real, when we get raw, when we get messy, and when instead of being in the feeling because that I think is part of what's going on with you, is that you're so in the feeling, you can't change it or shift it or acknowledge it. You're just in it. You go on the ride of it. And then later people are like, you did this, you did that. Or you watch and you're like, oh, I guess I did do that or did that. But what I'm trying to help you and other listeners consider is that when you step out of the feeling, that takes a lot of mindfulness, a lot of strength, a lot of vulnerability, and narrate it. We have an opportunity to make different choices and to expand and to grow.
Yeah.
Maybe this podcast is a little too much for her. She wants to convey a lot of her story out there, but there's so much to it. It was 7 months of an affair. So, yeah, she might get lost in what she's trying to say and the point and all of that, which happens to all of us. But I think she needs to stay on one topic at a time. And yes, take that accountability by saying, this is very hard for me. It could, turn out that I have this nervous laugh or this weird smile when a situation isn't something you should be smiling about or laughing about. This is where I'm trying to process and take control of myself and my behaviors to understand the situation that I'm in and how I'm getting through this and how I truly feel. I really feel like she's not being real with us. She just wants to put all the facts on the table, and that's why she has so much that she's thinking about at once, because there's so much that she wants to talk about instead of just sitting down, being real, and talking about how she's feeling.
Well, right now I'm feeling emotional because it's scary to be vulnerable and speaking on these things that are so personal and close to my heart, and figuring out myself on this journey with other people listening in and critiquing. And I used to have this huge block in my life that I didn't want to do anything wrong because I didn't want anybody to perceive me as something that I wasn't. I'm grateful for the experiences that I had so that I can be stronger and have this thicker skin and know myself better. And I'm still wrapping my head around my own self-worth and practicing these daily affirmations so that I don't fall back into these patterns of seeking out validation from other people to make me feel worthy within myself.
Oh, you've said so much and you did a really good job. So I love that you started with saying, I'm feeling emotional and I'm feeling vulnerable. And I have a lot to say about a number of things you just outlined, but just to stick with that for a moment, can you say a bit more? You did, but can you say even more about the emotion? What's coming up right now specifically?
Physically, my heart is beating. Well, obviously we're living beings, but I can feel it in my body. And sometimes I'll have a shortness of breath if I'm feeling anxious or overthinking. When I am in that emotional feeling, I don't know, my throat tightens up a little bit and my eyes start glistening with some tears, and it's a warmer feeling in my body, like I'm okay and I'm just human. And I think sharing these things about myself, I'd imagine that a lot of other people deal with these things too. And so that's giving me the strength to be courageous and speak out on these things. And there's that sense of like purpose there.
Yes. So many things going on in just moments. It's incredible. So what you're talking about, it's so valuable. So I'm going to expand on it for a moment. I mean, you just described symptoms of anxiety, physical symptoms of anxiety. The end, you started talking about something else. We'll take that on, but it's so powerful to say that out loud. So many people deal with anxiety and experience it physically in their body through chest tightness, through shortness of breath, through eyes glistening, right? Through the throat tightening. And it's scary and It can feel out of control. And our response often to that is to do something to make it go away because it's so uncomfortable, right? And so I want to highlight both that what happens to people with anxiety when they feel it in their body is that our body goes into, it's like a false alarm. Our body sets off the fight or flight system, right? And our body starts to respond as if we need to either fight or flight. And so cortisol starts going through our body, adrenaline starts going through our body, and it causes some of the symptoms and others that you described. And even though you and I are talking about tricky stuff, you're not actually in a fight or flight situation, right? That's why I call it a false alarm. It's like our body really reacts as if we need to protect ourselves, but really we're okay. So it's a helpful thing to remember when we have physical anxiety that it's really sort of a false alarm in terms of the intensity of the feelings. And probably what happens to you and to many when we get those feelings, as I alluded to before, they're so uncomfortable that we want to do things to make them go away. And smiling or laughing, for example, are things that actually start to inform our body that, no, we're okay, and starts to make some of those symptoms dissipate. So it's not surprising that you and others would adopt behaviors that attempt to combat these physical discomforts, right?
That makes so much sense. Yeah. And I've learned to your energy needs to escape your body. That's why exercising is so important every day. And so if you think about the physiology of your body and the energy that it takes to laugh, that is a way for your body to expel this energy that's trapped within you.
Now, she talks about being vulnerable and how it's hard to be vulnerable, and then that will then trigger the anxiety and the feelings of anxiety. The issue that I'm having is she chose to do this podcast. She chose to want to tell her story. She knew that she would have to be vulnerable. She knew that she would have to be, emotional in the sense that she's bringing up these traumas and it's going to trigger an emotion with her. I just don't get, if she doesn't want this to happen, then why did she choose to do this? Maybe she's not ready. Maybe she's not physically aware of her vulnerabilities to be able to express it the way she wants. And I know this is a whole journey for her. I just don't think this part of her journey, she's ready to talk about it with everything that she's recently just gone through, in the sense that it's still a fresh wound for her. And maybe she's just not ready to do this and tackle it the way she thought she could. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yes, which leads me to such an important, I think, next point. We have to get those feelings out, right? The anxiety and the fear and the worry and the self-loathing, whatever's coming up. If it doesn't come out, it gets trapped inside our body. It gets stuck. It stays there and it shows up as symptoms. Whether the symptoms are additional anxiety later, difficulty sleeping, irritability, eating too much, too little, etc., it shows up as symptoms if we don't find a safe space to let our tricky feelings out. And so what you were just suggesting is that the laugh is like a conduit to getting some of that energy out is so right. It's just that it's only halfway there, right? It gets some of the energy out, but not the quote, right energy out. But your impulse is totally correct, which is that if we let those feelings stay stuck in our body, that's what happens. They stay stuck and it doesn't feel good over time. There's no escaping that. I often say to clients, like, if it were true that we could just push down feelings, suppress them and be fine, I'd be all for it. Like, I'm into that. That sounds cool to me. Just doesn't work. They get stuck in our body. They have to come out in a safe way with safe people and in a practiced way. We have to build a muscle for it. So replacing your note, or maybe not replacing, expanding your notion that it's maybe not the laugh that does the trick, but it's the actual divulgence of like, this is what's happening to me. This is what I'm scared of in this moment. Or even in retrospect, this is what was happening to me. That's what I was scared of in that moment, is a very useful purge of emotion that is the only road to healing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so your impulse is totally right. And maybe that will help you. And others over time is that my impulse is to laugh. My impulse is to smile. Nothing like bad or wrong about that objectively. It's just not useful. It doesn't get the actual feelings out. And I suppose if we're considering the reaction of witnesses, it feels confusing to others, right? It doesn't feel like a match to what the topic is, which can be alienating over time, like personally in your world, and then I guess professionally as you have folks listening to you. But I agree with you, and maybe that supports the notion of what we were talking about before, that like, yes, something wants to come out. I just want to be a little more directive about what comes out. And if the first thing that comes out is a laugh, it'll happen again, Rachel. It's not going to happen, right?
Yeah.
If the first thing that comes out is a laugh or a smile, that you can catch yourself in the moment or catch yourself an hour later or a day later and say, I know what happened there. I did that thing again. You know, my core wound came up. I fell into that like pleasing young girl. I got scared of my own vulnerability and anxiety, fear, human. And I did what I've been doing since I was a little girl. What I really wanted to do is this. And so this is how I now want to talk about this situation. You don't have to get it perfect every time.
Yeah.
I think the therapist made a key point. She said, maybe you need to practice around people that you're comfortable with talking about these situations and being able to catch those, well, say tics where she's laughing when she's being vulnerable, or that nervous smile that she does, being able to catch herself, while also in the sense too, taking accountability at first, saying, this is something I'm working on, this is something I know that happens, and being aware of the situation while others are aware, and can maybe even hold her accountable in the sense that they'd be like, oh, Rachel, and like just stop it so that way she can keep going with her point and how she's feeling and what she's truly wanting to address. And it takes time. That's why I feel maybe she rushed into this a little too soon, which clearly she's aware that there are going to be lots of people listening to this, scrutinizing it and questioning everything she's saying and doing. So she knew that this was going to be an outcome of her putting this out. Maybe it's something she just wasn't ready for, not realizing she still had a lot more work to do on herself.
I think it's really cool though, like being so vulnerable and putting myself out there and getting this feedback from listeners who care. There's this piece of accountability where now I really have to watch myself back and listen to myself back and hear all the times that I laugh when I'm uncomfortable. And already from the first episode that I released to the second episode, I noticed a huge difference in how many times that I laughed. And so I feel like it's a beautiful thing to be able to do what I'm doing now in my life, because it's developing me into the person that I want to become. And this is the challenge. This is like the journey, and other people get to join in, which I think is really cool.
That's right. This is proper healing. This is proper healing, and real healing and real growth, as I said before, but it's so worth repeating, is messy. It's messy. Nobody goes from identifying a core wound, a problematic behavior, a trauma, and then pivots to the other side of total understanding and grace, right? Nobody does that. It takes a lot of hard work where we're back and forth. And as I said, we're messy and we repeat the same behaviors, and then we do a little better, and then we repeat the same behaviors. That's how we move through trauma and how we grow. So I totally agree with what you just said. I'm just adding to it. I think you're right that it's pretty amazing to put yourself out there and have people be able to witness not just the growth, but the messy stuff, because we all attempt to do better and then witness ourselves not doing better, and either discover that ourselves or have other people give us that feedback. That's painful, that can bring about feelings of shame, right? That's hard. And so you're holding that up for all of us to witness and to think about with regards to ourselves or people that we love. the only way to grow is to have messy stuff in the in-between. The
Mm-hmm.
only way. And I didn't want to miss what you said before. I'm kind of pivoting, but what you said before about your experience being so grounded and based in pleasing others, and then going to the other side where you were hyper focused on your own needs and sort of justifying the pursuit of those.
Mm-hmm.
And first of all, great insight. And I'm sure there are others that can relate. And that's useful to help put in context how you move through that situation. And also, I just wanted to provide this insight that paradoxically, the very extreme sets of behaviors, very different, obviously, paradoxically, they're really coming from the same place, which is an absence of relationship with your own true, tricky feelings. The very thing that we're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is that the hyper pleasing behavior obviously guided you to not deeply consider what you were feeling and what you needed and how others around you were impacting you. It guided you to just be vigilant about your surroundings and try to adapt and adopt what you felt other people wanted or needed from you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the other side of it is not dissimilar, because you're still not really considering your nuanced actual feelings.
Mm-hmm.
You are only focusing on sort of your drives, your hyper drives, like I want connection, I want love, I want sex, I want attention, I want validation, etc. But you're not really considering your nuanced feelings around like really feel inside about how I'm moving through the world, how I'm impacting other people. What do I really want right now? How do I want my life to be? How do I want my life to unfold? It's still an absence of connection with your actual feelings. The behaviors are quite different, but the root of it is not dissimilar. And so it all brings us back to the thing we've been talking about today with you in particular, and I think with many others, that this getting to know and lingering in your nuanced, complex, messy feelings is really the ingredient needed to show up in the world in a way that's more commiserate with how we're feeling inside.
Mm-hmm.
I think the constructive criticism is great. I like that she is reading what everyone is saying and kind of addressing it, but there is so much more that people are saying that she's not addressing. And she's holding herself accountable to her tics, like the nervous laugh and the smile, but she's not holding herself accountable when it comes to when people are like, well, why aren't you accepting that you had a part in this? Why aren't you accepting that you chose to keep going with this 7 months and you chose to continue to act and continuing to call him, look Ariana in the eyes and ask her, well, you should want to have sex with your boyfriend. Like, she chose all of those actions and she is not holding herself accountable. And yet people are saying, hey, you're not holding yourself accountable to the actions that you chose to do. But yet she can then be like, well, I'm holding myself accountable when people are asking about my nervous tics and why I'm laughing here. And it's like, yeah, that's a great step. That's a small step on this scale. But you're still not holding yourself accountable to the true purpose of all of this, which was to tell your side of the story of Sandoval and how you were feeling, what happened, all of that, and taking responsibility for what your part was in that affair. Am I right or am I wrong? Like, I think she's just missing the mark a little bit.
Beautifully stated.
Yeah. So it must be strange to reflect on those two extremes of yourself.
In the Meadows, we learned they have a really big codependency structure there. And so a piece of that is being needless, wantless, and not knowing what your needs are. And then the other side of that is knowing what your needs are, but not asking for them. Because if you ask for them, you feel like you're a burden.
Yes.
And so I've recognized those things in myself. And especially as I'm talking about my experience and reflecting on my actions through this past season, I noticed that I felt the most worthy when I was needed for someone else. And I wasn't able to really internalize my own needs and my own wants or prioritize those because how I was saying before, like, okay, I went in the other extreme and I was, just focusing on myself. I was still compromising my own wants and my own needs by hiding this relationship and letting somebody else take control of that and suppressing what I really wanted and needed.
Yes. Yes. You were hyper centering the need for validation, which was a pivot for you in terms of being at least in touch with the fact you had a need to be in connection, to be validated, to feel worthy, to feel loved, right? So that was different for you in that sense, because the way you're describing it prior, you had really focused on external pleasing of others. So you were guided by this sort of quote new principle of like, I want to be in connection. I want to be validated.
Yes.
I want to be needed. But you're so right in now understanding that it ended up violating your personal edict anyway, because you lost touch with what was right for you, what was moral for you, and how you as a person as a whole want to move through the world, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's such a painful lesson, obviously, but I assume a relatable one. There are lots of us that, due to a need for validation, which often comes out in romantic relationships with the most intensity, that we abandon other responsibilities in our life. I mean, concrete and otherwise, right? Like focus on work, focus on family, focus on friends, but other more moral responsibilities, like how to show up in the world and what values are we going to uphold. And it sounded like for you, those things all sort of became abandoned to experience that feeling of validation and being needed by someone. And those are, I mean, look, those are that's core stuff as humans we all deal with. We all want to feel wanted and needed and validated. And that's not going away, and we don't want it to. It's one of the things that sort of infuses color and meaning into our lives, is to be loved and to love others. So we don't want to set that aside completely, but we do want to center sort of our own value that comes from within before we can really give ourselves paradoxically more fully to a love relationship. The more we are centered and sort of grounded in our own value, the more we can give ourselves more fully and with more abandon in a love relationship. It's like paradoxical. But if you don't have that, and it sounded like you didn't at that time, you really, your feet aren't on the ground, right? You really can be led into places that you don't even realize you're going. And so it sounds like that's part of what happened to you.
And don't get me wrong, I think she did lose herself morally while also replacing that need that she didn't have previous by feeling wanted, and someone's looking at me with those eyes, and her just feeling loved and embracing it. And that's, yes, where you might get stuck in some situations that you never thought you'd be able to put yourself in, like having an affair with your best friend's boyfriend. And she let those feelings overpower her moral compass. But again, it wasn't all Tom's doing. She allowed herself to overpower that feeling of, maybe this is wrong. Maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Maybe I shouldn't be hooking up with my best friend's boyfriend, who they've been together for 9 years. She was not thinking clearly, and now that she is, she needs to be held accountable for what she did. Not in the sense that we are holding her accountable. She needs to hold herself accountable for her actions and be like, listen, I realize what I did was really messed up, and I see now that I lost focus of my moral compass. I see I let him telling me that he loved me and me feeling worthy and wanted, I let that overpower me and not think straight on what I was doing. holding herself accountable. That is the next step. And I think she needs to be more aware of how she's not holding herself accountable. And that's all I mean by this.
I wanted to ask, because my relationship with my ex, the first relationship that I had on this show, was a very volatile situation to be in. And I noticed patterns of codependency coming up for me in that relationship where I almost kind of lost myself. So, because that relationship was so unhealthy, do you think the unresolved feelings in that relationship carried over into the new relationship that I was in?
Yes, of course, when we have unprocessed trauma stuck in our body and in our minds and in our heart and in our soul, it's not a guess, it's not a hypothesis. It's going to impact significantly how we move through the world and certainly how we move through our next relationship if the trauma is relationship based. And most traumas are, but I mean, particularly if it was a romantic relationship. So to the extent that there was confusion and anxiety and shame and guilt and resentment and fear and embarrassment and all of the potential dynamics associated with an unhealthy, toxic relationship stuck in your body, it's going to come out as symptoms, as we were talking about before. And so as it relates to being in a new relationship, it's going to impact how we show up, how we choose to move through it. And it probably takes one of two paths. Either we show up with a certain level of passivity for fear of repeating the trauma or inviting that same anger or shame cycle, or we show up with a certain level of aggression or intense self-advocacy, get me before they get me kind of thing. And we may visit both extremes during it. So there's no question. It's one of the reasons that taking the time, I mean, I can't overemphasize this. I almost feel like I'm saying it in a cliche way. Taking the time to process intense trauma is not just a good idea. It's critical. It's mandatory, or we will continue to sort of create collateral damage because it's unexplored and it's leading us rather than us processing it and choosing how we are going.
And in my opinion, I think she didn't take the time she needed after her relationship with James to figure out what was going on. That she had this codependency issue, that she had this trauma. I think she replaced it when, Sandoval started showing her some kind of affection, attention, and putting that like she's worthy into her mindset. And she entrapped herself into something else she wasn't ready for because she didn't understand what she went through the last time. And listen, I've been there. I've made the same mistake where I went from one relationship into the next and it was another codependent relationship until I took the time to reflect, learn my behaviors, learn what I was doing, learn how to fix what I was doing and what I wanted for myself to better my life. Only then did the next relationship I get into mean everything. And it was a lot different than all of my other relationships because I was aware, because I knew what I needed to do, because I knew what I was looking for. I knew what I didn't want in a relationship, all of that. And I don't think that she was ready. And when, you put a cookie in front of a kid, they're going to want the cookie. It was the same thing with her. Tom was sitting there giving her the attention, giving her, the compliments and the love and affection that she was looking for. And she ate it up.
To move forward with it after we've integrated it.
I think you listed all of those things, and one of them that came to mind for me was self-sabotage.
Yes, that's right. Well, if we already feel damaged and confused and uncertain, right? We over-identify with that as who we are and all that we can create. And so we find ways to bring it back to that baseline over and over again, unless we explore the trauma. Otherwise, it's an almost certain path.
You said something very interesting with the validation coming up in our love relationships, and going forward, realizing that through my therapy process, I'm not dating for a year. And in doing that, I'm just focusing on myself. And after this talk, focusing on my emotions that come up for me, like what are my own needs that I need met, and not adding an additional person into the equation so that it is just focused on me and other people as well, like my friends and family and the people that are in my inner circle that are safe friends.
Yeah.
But in doing a full year of not dating, I feel like that's the game plan going forward. It made me think, since you said we seek validation in our love relationships, I could see how we could also seek validation in our professional work career life as well. I think maybe the entertainment industry as a whole is a magnet for people who are seeking that external validation.
I think it's a great game plan that she stays single for a year, that she works on herself, that she tries to understand her behaviors, learn acceptance, learn accountability, learn different triggers that she has, all of that. What she's looking for in a relationship, what she doesn't want in a relationship, it's all good to work on. I'm kind of curious on when her year began. Was it like after the reunion? Was it in her treatment facility at the Meadows that she made this goal? Because then that means the year is going to be over pretty damn soon, too. And sometimes it takes longer than a year. Sometimes it takes less than a year. Sometimes it could take a month, a week. Everyone is different in how they cope. Everyone is different in how they can understand. She's at a point in her life that she's really learning. James, she admitted, was her first relationship, her real first relationship, where they lived together, all of that. So this is a process that she will have to learn and figure out and understand. And in that process, this will only make her stronger. I just hope that she is more aware of the hurt that she put in so many people's lives, that she is not taking accountability for and trying to blame on others. That is my only thing with Rachel right now. What do you guys think? Let me know down below. We have about a couple minutes left, and they're going to go into how celebrities seek out attention, which, yes, going online and putting yourself out there, you are fulfilling something, whether you like to do it, whether you are fulfilling a need of attention, or that's why you see people always wanting to be the victim online so that they can have that validation from people that, oh, it's okay. This is going to be interesting to hear. So let's get into it.
And so could you speak on that?
Yeah. You brought up so many good points. I mean, I oftentimes, sort of clinically speaking, the intensity of the need for validation shows up the most in love relationships, but you are absolutely right. It shows up in all relationships, familial and friendships and professionally. Totally right. And I think it seems by definition to be likely true that when someone chooses the entertainment industry, they at minimum are not shying away from the validation that comes from being in that kind of position, and likely in many situations feel a level of sort of groundedness and satisfaction and value by getting that feedback, right? That's a good hypothesis, and I'm sure there's exceptions, but it's a good hypothesis that those who are in the entertainment industry benefit from that from some standpoint, and perhaps there's a continuum, I'm sure. And I think that's a really important thing for you to think about, and those that are in the entertainment industry to sort of curate as much groundedness around that because it's seductive, right? It's compelling to have feedback coming from the public. Certainly that's supportive and loving and full of admiration. And even the so-called negative feedback or hate can also be seductive because it brings along a certain level of drama and self-focus. So the whole thing can be just a huge feedback loop that has positive and negative aspects, but is addictive.
Very interesting. And one of my hesitations during this podcast too was, am I just repeating another cycle? Like, am I just inserting myself back into this validation circle? And so that is a concern of mine because I do feel like I feel a sense of value and purpose when I do get feedback from other people who have dealt with toxic, narcissistic relationships and know the trauma bond that I've experienced through my relationships and through this show. And so I think it's that sense of community and connectedness that is the underlying motivator with that. So I'm not sure, like, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Could it be a bit of both?
I'm so glad you brought that up because you're doing what I was talking about at the beginning, which is making like a process comment that like, I'm sitting here thinking about, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Am I just inserting myself back into that seductive feedback loop that we were just talking about? And here's my answer. I think I say this all the time. Two things can be true at the same time. You should be brutally introspective about that. Is there a part that is related to the seductiveness of the public feedback and admiration? Probably. And the closer you stay to that truth, the more you can manage its impact, right? It sounds very human to me to be in a public position and to feel the energy. That sounds very human to me. I don't know how you turn that off completely. So I would make better friends with that. That like, yeah, there's a part of me that likes the energy, likes the feedback, likes the feedback loop of engagement and to be a version of at the center of it. Like there's a part of me that likes that. And I think that's okay. The point is being able to recognize where that begins and we begin and that ends and we end, right? That you aren't so merged with it, that your value is derived from it and that you lose yourself in it. So being able to keep it separate in your mind that like, yep, that's a fun arena I sometimes engage in and enjoy. I don't overdefine myself by it. And when I say fun, I just mean the part of it that is around the admiration and the seduction that we're talking about. Obviously, the part where you are adding value by having conversations like this is more purposeful and has more meaning. And there's a truth to it. I'm certain people will listen to this and other podcasts talking about mental health and feel impacted by it. And you and others engaging in that kind of dialogue should feel good about it. I think it's a wonderful thing to promote real, raw, honest conversations about hard stuff internally. We don't talk about it enough, right? Yeah. But I think you just really getting honest with yourself about like, how much am I engaging in this? Where's my validation coming from? Yes, part of this does feel really good and cool. Great. I'm going to set that aside. I'm going to compartmentalize. I'm going to get back to who I am, who I want to be, what my insecurities are, what my fears are, how I want to grow, et cetera, that you don't overly merge with it. You don't over-identify with it. It's like a full-time job to keep creating that separation. So I wouldn't lose sight of it. And I also would embrace it, if that makes sense, because it's part of your world and you want to make choices about your relationship with it, not have it happen to you.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining me today and giving your insight on all of this and being so open to what I have to say. And I really appreciate the encouragement going forward. And obviously, I appreciate your validation in me expressing how I've reflected on my actions and how I'm going forward to make better choices for myself. And I think my listeners will benefit from this conversation too. So thank you so much, Dr. Goldsher.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure to be with you.
I do think she got back into this to have a sense of validation. And she believes that that validation is something that she needs. She loves the validation. It was something she even said she seeked before when she did Miss California and doing pageants and all of that. And then wanted more validation by being on the show. And I think this was her way of getting validation that she isn't a bad person, that she can have people feel bad for her and all that she's gone through. When, though Ariana talks about it, people comment and tell her she needs to move on, or that she cheated with Tom. How is this any different? With validation from a large audience, you are going to get negative validation along with positive. I do feel like she can use this platform as a way to grow. Talk about mental health, have more conversations about mental health, and being aware of different things. But I also don't think it needs to be fully surrounded about this whole Sandoval. I do hope that she can take this podcast to a different, more understanding level for herself. And I'm not going to lie and sit here and say I feel like she also might not do that. And once Vanderpump starts, that she is going to be dragged into the drama and want even more validation by what occurs there. And I'm not sure if that is necessarily a good thing. But anyways, this is this week's podcast from Rachel Leviss as Rachel Goes Rogue. I hope you all let me know what you think about this week's podcast episode down below in my comments. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more Bravo, Vanderpump, celebrity influencer news, content, all of that good stuff. Hope you all have a wonderful evening, and I will see you again soon. Bye, everyone.
Look pretty on your arm once you cover up my bruises and battle scars, but it always ends the same. Can't bear the things I've had to face. Got you crying on your knees in pain. Oh, some things never change. Never